again. Come with me, leave your yesterday behind. I step outside your mind.
Oh, what a great slideshow.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. We'll perhaps have a few more. I've recorded this, so in case you don't want to be seen, you can also turn off your camera. In case you didn't know, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Whitney Retzer. I'm the Director of Engagement with the Microschools Network. And at the Microschools Network, we've been around for several years now, but we've really done a lot of work in the last couple of years to engage small schools, micro schools, hub, hybrid. I mean, I think most of you are in education, so you know the tremendous scope of educational possibilities that exist out there right now. And part of our work is really engaging small school owners and educators into resources that we have, and also in order to provide a greater picture for parents of the possibilities that exist out there, and also, to understand what sort of opportunities that they have for choosing schools. And so I think one of our main missions is to make unconventional learning environments conventional. And so we've started a webinar series because with the hopes that we're inviting different folks from around the globe to talk about their experience, and also to hopefully shed light and have opportunities to ask questions themselves. And so I'd like to introduce Dr. Stuart Grauer. Some of you might know him. He's got the Grauer School. He's a 3-time author. He's been around international education for many moons, teaching in Basel and also opening up another founding school as well. And so I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Grauer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for being here to talk about leadership and management strategies for small school leaders. And special thanks to you, Whitney, for hosting the event and all the support you're providing to smaller learning communities like microschools. And your work is critical, and this is a rapidly changing educational landscape that we're in. And today, to frame that, I'll present 6 stories designed to fortify each of you involved in this crazy endeavor to start a microschool or small school or homeschool, and whether or not you want to grow it, but certainly you all want to sustain it, and that's what I'm going to be addressing. These stories are not designed to cover the massive or technical field like leadership or how to be a manager or community education. Each of these are very large fields that discover that take years of study. These stories are designed just to expand your experiences, and you can't run a school with a how-to manual, but you can run it with a constant search for bigger visions. And so let's spend an hour to get you thinking and envisioning and really immersed in the amazing life of the small school leader. I want to start by sharing a recent experience that connects directly to the heart of what small school leadership means to me. It's a story. I just returned from a ranch in the Gavilan Mountains of California. That's Woody Guthrie and John Steinbeck country. And I was traveling with 16 high school students, the size of a micro school, in 2 vans. During our time there, we met people who shared various thoughts on schooling, perspectives that resonate deeply with small school work. We headed north from Encinitas, where I live, and after a few hours, we crossed into San Benito County near Paycine, California. That was far from my beach town in San Diego County. The landscape started turning from the beach to rugged and isolated and hilly. Radio stations dropped away until we were left with just 5, 3 playing Mexican music, 1 with country tunes, and 1 with a Christian station broadcasting hymns and sermons. I love the timeless quality of the isolation as we grew deeper and deeper in, the hawks and turkey vultures circling around, and we climbed into these remote mountains. We were immersing. And during that journey, in the car, a text popped up on my phone from a family member who always loved, and you have a family member like this, who always loves to find whatever educational activism they can send you. 10,000 books banned from the United States public schools this past academic year, according to The Guardian. I know it's easy to immediately pass judgment on news like that or to be appalled. And now, driving through the hills and the ranchlands, here I was in a place where people to find their own education, like each of you have, unconstrained by someone else's reading list. And I didn't know these people up there. Should I tell them to add more radio stations? Should I tell them to remove some? Should I be the one deciding what they read? So the American melting pot suddenly took on a new light there. It felt distant. And maybe the small school experience is not about deciding what others should do, but about blending away the differences and instead recognizing your unique identity of where you are, wherever you are. What makes that special? Why are you running a micro school there? So we arrived at the Bar SZ Ranch, and Tim and Michelle Borland greeted us warmly in their cowboy hats and jeans, and their mission was to regenerate the ecosystem of that ranch, starting with the soil. It wasn't just a farming approach, it was an educational purpose that resonated with me, the whole concept of regeneration. This ranch raised grass-fed cattle and was working towards organic certification for their crops and meats. And so that night at our family meeting with the students, I asked the students if they had heard of regenerative agriculture. And of the 16, and these are high school students, not one of them knew what it was. So I just told them, few things will impact your future more than regenerative agriculture will. Let's find out. But later in the week, 4 students visited the regenerative vineyards with me near the famous Paycine Ranch. And I could see that when they picked a few grapes and tasted them, the lights started coming on. They'll remember regeneration. And they'll remember why the people up there on the ranch put the sheep right in there to create natural fertilizer and to trim the grapes. So that night at the barn dance, I spoke with Michelle and Tim's son, Colton, between dances. He was 18 years old and starting his senior year in high school, just like some of my students were that were right there with him. And he explained that he and his sister had attended the local public school 20 or 30 miles away through the hills until they decided to leave. It wasn't too bad, Colton said, until we got a new teacher who didn't understand our local culture. And Colton wasn't bitter at all. It was simply a fact for him. The teacher hadn't connected with the community. It was someone the public district office had moved in who was an available teacher who hadn't connected with the community, the land, or the people. If they needed to round up the horses or had to come in late, all she had was demerits and penalties, not curiosity for what they were going through. So they chose homeschooling. There were only 23 students at their public school. And when our family and neighbors left, he said, we took 9 of them. So they left the public school with almost nothing. And he said that with no regrets or animosity. He said it with just with calmness. And he talked about community and land and family and the principles that were central to his learning. And listening to him, I recognized the clarity of so many home and micro schoolers and small school students I've known. I felt talking to this 18-year-old that my own beliefs were being reflected back, articulated by someone who lived them every day in those hills. A leadership point. A key purpose for small school education is to encourage students to dive deeply into the place they come from. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're forming, Mike. That's why we want that special place-based education. There are connections to be made between almost every subject we study and the environment around us, and those connections matter. And second to that story, I want to ask each of you to think about the first thing you bought for your micro school or small school. And feel free to jot down side notes for yourself on the first thing you bought or things, or even put it into the margin notes, the chat. Because I'll tell you what mine was back in 1991 when I was opening up with just 7 students in a borrowed storefront. It was the American flag, my first purchase. I've never forgotten the profound truth that in the United States, you can educate your children any way you see fit, and that you can actually start a school. For some reason, this is still a mind-blowing, amazing fact for me. And you may disagree, but I believe that a school is not a school unless it's a living, breathing part of the community, part of its heartbeat. And that's what I keep hearing, this heartbeat metaphor in school communities literally all around the world that contact the Small Schools Coalition and ask me for help in retaining their small local community school. So the community deserves to know if your mission is being implemented and why you are there. It's not just a hideaway. And anyway, that's my first story about the trip to ranch country. Before we get too much deeper, as Whitney said, my name is Stuart Grauer. I'm the founder of the Grauer School, which started as we might call today a micro school or a free school, though it wasn't entirely free. I'm also the founder of the Small Schools Coalition, which I began 12 years ago. And over the years, I've had the privilege of helping small schools all over the world develop strategies to sustain and grow in the face of their unique challenges. And I might be able to help your school sustain, grow, or fight for your life. And so, hi, Neil. Whitney, I can see some of the pictures here. Are people just coming and going on the screen, or what's happening with that?
Yeah, we have a few people that are trickling in, but yeah, I think people are listening. Um, I'm
Okay.
curious, with the Small Schools Coalition, you've been working with it for 12 years, and what are some of I believe you're going to talk about it later, but I mean, you have so many resources that are there, from research to management strategies and a variety of things. What sort of things do you really focus on, or what kind of things do people appeal to you for?
That's a great question, Whitney. The most general, profound purpose of the Small Schools Coalition is to help small school leaders prove to their communities with stories and data and rich research that schools are not less by virtue of their small size, that in so many respects they're small, because we're amidst a 120-year trend in schools increasing and growing in size, and leadership trends which tell us all that the bigger you are, the more successful you've been. And that's damaging kids all over the country. And just one second, I have to lift the dog up onto the couch.
Of course.
All right. Thank you. Um, so that's some of the things I've been doing over the past years. And also for the past 6 or 7 years, I've been writing the first leadership book specifically for small school leaders. There's never been anything done like this, and I don't know that there's a gigantic market for it, but for each of you trying to muddle through the incredible unpredictable challenges that are going to keep happening as you navigate your way, whether your goal is to stay with 7 or to go to 200, or whether, whatever number you want to get to, you're going to be facing challenges. And so that book is called The Way to Pancho's Kitchen. And I am
I'll
going to
put a
be,
link. I'll put a link into the chat for everyone if they want to
yeah,
check it
and
out.
it'll be published early next year. And I do have a list of people who want advanced copies of it. And it's a story manual. So anyway, it's filled with things that beta readers and small school leaders who have read it in advance have found compelling and unforgettable, and it's going to help you on your journey. So thanks for putting that up. So today is 6 strategies in total, or 5 more stories beyond the one I just told you, that can develop to ensure that your work has the power and the clarity and the impact that it can have. And because I believe in the power of storytelling, I'm going to illustrate these points, these leadership and management principles, through stories I love. Stories that these can leave more vivid memories than simple data points. I'm sure I can impress you with the data behind each one of these, but here's the reality. Not only every generation, but pretty much every year, the data points keep getting replaced. These 6 points, I think, are going to be indelible, and they're going to sustain you. So story 2 is called perseverance. And if you want to sustain and thrive, you need to be strategic. And strategy isn't just about creating a plan or following a roadmap. It's something simpler than that. It's more primal for me. If you want to be a survivor, that's your definition of strategy, whatever it takes to survive. It means succeeding in the marketplace. That's a reality. And a lot of times, to me, it simply means beating out the competition. So, I mean, you've got to really want it to establish your place. And yes, it can be a jungle out there, but we all want to survive and even thrive, and we deserve to. And to do that, we have to be fearless. So let me tell you a brief story about bearing rejection, something you'll encounter if you're going to survive in this business for long. All right. In my first year of running the Grauer School, I applied to the Western Association of Schools and Colleges for accreditation. My business model was probably very much like yours, but at the time it was so strange that WASC, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, the largest accreditor in the United States, sent their executive director, the head of the whole thing, Don Halverson, along with the towering superintendent of a very large nearby school district, a former All-American basketball player, and they showed up for the visit. Why would the University of California, rather WASC, send the accreditor of University of California, send their executive director and their biggest local hitter to go to a shopping mall? So they stood outside my school, which was in the strip mall, looking like power figures out of place. So I stood inside in my chinos and casual and comfortable. And sometimes I think I started a school just so I wouldn't have to wear a tie anymore. And I never made it past JV basketball. And here I was facing these 2 powerhouses as they ambled in with skepticism written all over their faces. And they just kind of prowled around with expressions on their face. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the head of WASC. I'm preparing to move ahead with your application on the strength of your declaration that you feel your school is accreditable. However, I have severe reservations. And he listed 2 reasons. And these 2 reasons he suggested for why my school was unaccreditable are probably the reasons for your schools. Number 1, the few number of students, and number 2, my intention to use alternative ways to achieve instruction. On that basis, we flunked accreditation. And again, these were his reasons that I shouldn't have even been applying. Leadership point is, my reaction to that failure wasn't disappointment. It was, I wouldn't say it was rage, it was just resolve. It was obvious to me immediately that I was going to be back the next year and hit him way harder. But just know this: if you're an original, if you're the real thing, plan to be rejected, misunderstood, possibly and probably mocked, lied about, and loved as soon as people realize you mean business. Sometimes even the love is false. You can be the flavor of the month. Don't wag your tail when the people recognize you first. But anyway, next year we passed. Today, that letter from the president of the executive director of WASC is framed and hanging on my boardroom wall. Since
I
then,
Yeah, I
uh-huh.
was going to say, Stuart, I think it's also worth mentioning how they commonly ask for your expertise these days. WASC does in reviewing accreditation, right? It's an ironic story.
Yes, shortly thereafter, I got a call to accredit another school, and it was the regional head of WASC, and I knew something was up. He was vetting me, and we accredited a very strange school out in the country. This, and I realized that he was checking me out to be a chair. And for the following 30 years, anytime a school came up that was strange or wouldn't have been understood by normal accreditors, I got the call, and I accredited schools all over the American West and Hawaii, but only ones that were little understood, small, struggling, that where they believed that I would have a special insight. And I've been able to help so many of these schools get their accreditation. But the point of the story is perseverance is the key if you are an original. And I have one short poem that I've read to my faculty so many times, and to myself. It's on my wall. I don't need to read it from the words anymore. I've memorized it. It is called "The Way It Is." It's by William Stafford, the poet, and it goes like this: "There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. It's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread." So story 3 is called Heritage. And I want to talk about the small school movement and its lineage of heroes, because you may think you're just doing some small thing, but in fact, you're in a long line of amazing, courageous educators. And I want everybody in the micro school movement and the small school movement to understand they're not a one-off. This is a story of a legend of mine called Dick Busby. And I want you to think about who your heroes are. You're not inventing this. You're advancing a great field. And your field, and let me make one key point first and foremost, and your field is not the rejection of another system. It's not a rejection of the public system. You're not out there to say you're going to fix them or that you're a reaction to anything. It must never be cast this way. Many people in the public system are putting their hearts into something they believe in. You are in a different field. Here's the story. Dick Busby was born in 1945 in Mobile, Alabama. He served in the U.S. Air Force. He liked rodeos, and in 1973, he founded a private high school called Educational Dynamics in Escondido, San Diego, California. Back then, few people thought much about smaller schools. Deb Meyer was the legendary MacArthur Genius Award recipient, was working at Central Park East, one of the first famous small schools. Ted Sizer had founded this coalition of essential schools that were generally small schools. In the 80s, Jerry Mintz was starting the amazing Alternative Education Resource Organization, which I hope Micro Schools Network will connect with strongly. I personally was inspired by the little international schools scattered all around the Swiss Alps that began popping up also in the Rocky Mountain ski towns. These are all part of a loose network of people who felt schools were too big, too bureaucratic, too detached from their communities, too standardized, test-driven, and they wanted to try their hand at something else. At the time, the number one reason families chose, when I started the school, the Grauer School, for the first probably 20 years, the number one reason families chose schools in the United States was this. Who thinks they know? The reason was the football team. That's a fact. And again, that's their choice. Wave the flag. Dick Busby was no radical like Jonathan Holtz or Ted Sizer. He was just an Air Force vet who always needed a shave and ordered a couple of Jeeps in a crate and took his kids exploring the Baja. And his school served two kinds of students, the gifted and the disillusioned. Dick was the first educator I came across who made absolutely no distinction between those two categories of kids. And I think you probably don't either. He removed artificial categories and he assigned no grades. He offered quiet affirmation to those kids who needed it, and his students spent a lot of time outdoors. He taught in a one-room schoolhouse that was his house, where all ages learned together, like kids had learned together for millennia until the modern school separated us into grade levels and a lot of other separations as well. But watching Dick work, I marveled at how natural and simple his approach was. He never had a theory. He trusted kids to do what they needed to do. He knew the kids were natural learners, and the only thing you can do is learn if you're healthy. And he ended up everyone ended up teaching everyone else in his schoolhouse. That's what we call now age mixing, but it's one of the most historical, effective ways kids learn. Back then, in graduate schools of education, they would have called that chaos. Probably my favorite class of all time was one of grades 3 through 8 that I taught in Carlsbad, California. And we all taught each other everything. And I was as much of a student as they were. But Dick was undoing this separateness that our education systems had institutionalized. And he still had time for basic skills and some seat work. But for his students, that work was just part of the experience, not the point of it. And so I want this age mixing and the smallness of your school to be the ultimate point of pride. And as you mentioned before, the Small Schools Coalition has all the data you could ever use when you're giving a speech or training teachers to want to show your community exactly why that's so powerful. Dick was passed away of a heart attack in his mid-50s. He was a real original. He taught me the courage to take students into the wild, something no one else in our area was doing. So today, when I take students deep into the Baja with its Dr. Seuss trees and hidden turquoise bays and crumbling Spanish missions, I always think of Dick and his Jeep troop wagons and his ability to make the world a classroom for teens who felt trapped otherwise. So we have heroes, and I love the small school legends. I hope you see yourself as a part of the tradition that you study and practice right now. The simplest, most profound leadership point I have of the day is that we are part of a noble tradition. Smaller learning communities have often been seen as ideal throughout history. Whether it was Socratic teaching in ancient Greece, the mentorship that was going on that started in the medieval monasteries, one-room schoolhouses in early rural America, smaller learning communities have always been about fostering connection and mentorship, and we're retaining that. We're that thread, something that's often lost in many schools and that we share. Story number 4 of my 6 today is called Being the Best in the World. And this is going to be a stretch at first, and I think you're going to love this point after you really understand it. So the next strategy I want to share, again, is crucial. There's no greater strategy for you than striving for that level of excellence. Let me tell you a story about my secret list to illustrate the point that I'm about to make. I was on a retreat up in Maine to write. A parent called me up from back at the school. And again, that's across country. His voice was filled with fervor. His must-share idea. You may have gotten these calls before. Teaching our high school kids about cybercrime. We must do this. It was the future. I was in the middle of rounding up the canoe paddle and life vest and ready to get out on the water early and then start writing. And convinced he'd found the missing link in modern education, he didn't inquire if this was already in our curriculum, or if I was listening, or if I needed anything. He just needed to download. I quietly earmarked his passion for a unique repository that I keep, the list. 20 minutes into the call, the parent finally came up for air, for a pause. I'm in Maine, I said, looking out at my canoe. It was upright and ready to shove off. And the trees, it was beautiful across the lake, tinged with all the new colors. Unperturbed, Not listening, he dove back into his monologue. I was tempted to multitask. I had a lot of email. I'm terrible. I know it. You've probably done it too. I hope none of you are emailing right now, but you could be. After 30 minutes, he finally asked, "So, Stuart, how have you been doing?" And he gave a brief pause, kind of bordering on guilt. And I said, "I think I'm coming down with a cold." And he resumed his pitch without missing a beat. I know he's a good father. Our kids need this restated. As in most of the pleas, there was a subtext that never came up. I had reason to believe that this dad was worried about his son, and also I knew he was worried about his finances. Though that wasn't what we were talking about. In many calls and most pleas, there are two reasons. There's the stated reason, and there's the real or underlying, sometimes subconscious reason for the call or the plea. He's a warm, loving man. I really like him. First of two leadership points about this story. Most people would say the topic of the phone call was cybercrime or curriculum. I wouldn't say that at all. I would say the topic was something I want to be our school to be the greatest at, our strategic edge, empathy. Small schools have that advantage. There's no gatekeeper. He could call up the head of school in Maine. It's strategic when the other schools can't do that as well. I really like this dad. I knew he needed his self-esteem. The second point, I didn't commit to any cybercrime curriculum or hint that I would, though I acknowledged that I would study the issue, because leadership is about cultivating the opposite, not picking up everybody's necessary idea, but finding just those unique ideas that make our ecosystem robust and pruning the rest ruthlessly. This is what Jim Collins called the hedgehog principle. If you've read the book Good to Great, it's a guide here. The principle is based on the Greek fable. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehogs know one big thing. In the small learning communities like yours, this means focusing on what you can do best, whether it's individualized learning, fostering community, getting outdoor experiential education going. You need to identify and project and measure what it is that are your unique defining values. What are your specific intentions? What distinguishes you? And if you can't do that, you haven't earned your place in the community yet. You need to write down those distinguishing ideas, publish them, live by them, say them again and again for years, never tire them. What makes you special or necessary in your community? And here's the hard part. You need to validate them. And I know this might sound anti-small school and anti-experiential, but you need to show their impact. If you can't verify your work's value to the community, then its meaning becomes diminished. You need stories, but you need data points as well. You need to provide evidence that you're successfully doing just what you say you're doing, you will do. You don't need to measure what other schools measure. You don't need to measure standardized testing, but you need to verify, to state your purpose clearly and measure just that and prove you're doing it. If your purpose is to get high reading scores, you need to get data. That's easy to get. But if your purpose is to generate kind-hearted and courageous souls, you equally need evidence and preferably data to document that. School evaluation is a topic, the single most topic that I find so many small school teachers and leaders have a gap in. Many of you haven't studied school evaluation strategies, and I've guided many among you in finding evidence and learning how to demonstrate the achievement of the mission, because that's what parents need to know. They need to know that you've done what you say you're going to do. Demonstrating achievement of mission is crucial, especially if you're doing something unique and inspiring. It's not enough just to have a beautiful mission statement. We've all heard too many of those. The leadership point here is that leadership requires a relentless focus on what makes us special and great. So Jim Collins said in that same book, if you cannot be the best in the world at your core business, then your core business absolutely cannot form the basis of a great company. This is a constant challenge of more value than any other asset. And we're lucky right now that all kinds of new measures such as the challenge success and the high school survey of student engagement, and some of these measures that are norming values are finally coming on the market, so we can actually measure some of these qualitative values and character issues that we used to see as esoteric. Now we can say where we rank nationwide against other schools or statewide, and we can get data on whatever your school mission. I can guarantee you now that measures are now starting to come on the market that will enable to get you data, but you also can start telling your stories as evidence as well, as I'm trying to do today. Story 5 is called Have a Founding Story. A founding story is more than just a tale of beginnings. It's an enduring tool for leadership. It offers a glimpse into the decision-making and challenges faced and overcome when you've established your school. So here's one. When the Grauer School was founded, our town was in the middle of voting on a new park, but it was hotly contested, and the park was going to get turned down because the neighbors refused to have anything in the park that might attract teenagers, like a basketball hoop or skateboard areas. They didn't want teens there, but I was in the middle of starting a school for teens, thinking they have no voice. There's nobody for them to talk to. People in our community think they're scary. Suddenly, because of this, I had a moral imperative. Teens needed a voice, and the purpose of our school was to give them that voice and give them a place. So that story is now a part of our founding narrative. Every teacher at our school knows it. For generation after generation, we've been telling that story about how they couldn't even get a park in our town. We gave teens a voice when others would not. That's a founding story. So leadership, your founding story helps define your mission. It's a tool that inspires and motivates and reminds everyone in your community why you started. You share it widely. It's part of your heritage. It makes you richer. It makes you bigger. It makes sure, and you make sure your job is to make sure it lives on. It ensures that you inspire each new generation, and every new teacher has to hear it all over again. It'll take on new resonance through the years. Sometimes some of the emphasis of it might even shift a little bit. The story can even evolve, or maybe you'll even realize newer founding stories that were going on that you weren't aware of. So anyway, story 6, my last story for the morning. And thank you very much. You're super patient. And I love looking at you intently, appreciating sharing these with me. I appreciate that. My last story is called the work-life integration paradox. You want work-life balance, but you also want a successful, sustainable small school. The biggest phrase I heard out of the last generation of rising teachers was all about work-life balance. Here is my leadership guidance for the day to small school leaders. Forget it. Small school leadership is not a job. It's an identity. It means showing up on campus in a wetsuit, hosting a teacher or board reception at your home. It's closing tuition deals while jogging or knitting. It means meeting prospective parents at galas all over town or at private parties. Every party you go to, every toast you're making, you're not just you, you're a small school leader, no matter the occasion. Small school leadership is integrated into your life. On our campus, I've hosted weddings right on our campus. I have hosted several funerals. I've closed enrollment deals and hired teachers out in the local surf. I've celebrated new babies on our campus. I've handed out the coolest swag in the world, Grauer School hot sauce, because that's a local thing. Grauer School dog biscuits. I'm not kidding you. T-shirts. It's an all-encompassing identity that you wear. You wear your identity like a badge. And what's most amazing to it, if you know you're a small school leader, when everything in the world relates to what you're doing somehow. You can walk down and somehow the pencils you pick out are on mission for you. If you're on the front lines, you'll see everyone's successes in your community, but you'll also feel their pains and their losses. You will have no gatekeepers, no secretary to keep people out of your office, no meetings to hide behind. At your best, you'll greet every single person as they come onto your campus every day. You're taking over an asset that's by far more valuable to every family than anything else in their world, anything in their entire world. You're taking on their child. If a lawyer parent is fighting $1 million case and you call with something serious happening to their child, you know what they're going to pick. There's nothing more precious to a family than your work. It's not so easy for you since a school is your child. And some people, many people, are going to be self-interested and they're going to take their own ego or their own self above that child of yours. And one evening, I was sitting alone at my desk on campus, attending to the small details that nobody else in the world would notice. That's leadership. That's expertise, is noticing, attending. The expert notices those things that no one else notices, the smallest details. Those details are the things that add up over time. They're the million tiny levers that, when pulled together, create strategy. It was 6 p.m. or maybe later, and my office overlooked a construction site on campus, and the phone rang, and it was Sally describing another lovingly made candlelit dinner waiting at home. And I said, of course, I'll be right there. And I said that, but it took me a long time before I realized that I was lying. I never intended to get right home. I subconsciously thought maybe I would, because I was so busy lying to myself that these details could be easily resolved. And by the time I got home that night, it was cold, both food and Sally. And that's some of small school leadership for you. Like parenting, your school requires all the love you can give it if you're going to succeed. And your school needs you in all seasons. And this reality can create deep conflicts that feel, like it did for me at that moment, impossible to resolve until you finally do see the resolution. You come to see this conflict as a permanent paradox, something that you will never solve. And once you realize that the conflict is just a permanent paradox, in a way, the conflict goes away and you can smile, because it's like raising a child. You can't withhold your love. And suddenly you're able to compromise a little bit better, knowing that you're never going to solve all of it. Somehow that paradox saved me. Leadership point: accept the paradox. The conflict takes on a new dimension in your life. You're living with this. That's my story, and I think it may be yours as well. So I just want to wrap up and say, you're all part of something that's much bigger. That's 6 simple stories. I hope some of them have fortified you. They're stories that remind us that we're part of something meaningful, and I hope durable for you. I hope that you're developing your own stories, and I would love to hear them. If you want a first edition of The Way to Pancho's Kitchen, which has elaborate, extremely colorful stories, some that I probably shouldn't have even told, sign up for thewaytopanchoskitchen.com. It's a book of beautiful journeys filled with stories to inspire and entertain people in all times of leadership. I also want to offer you your support as a consultant for small schools. I work on a sliding scale to meet the realistic costs of small schools. Whatever you're going through, after 50 years being spent with teens, teachers, and parents, I think I've probably been through it. So email me at stuart@grauerschool.com, and we can talk about your story and consider a boost in prosperity, whether it's about leadership, strategic planning, maybe you're getting into board governance at some point, accreditation, or just someone to download to and to make sense of it all with. So thanks for being here today. And remember, small schools are not less by virtue of their size. They're just as big as their stories, and your work matters, and you're making a lasting impact. So thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Grauer. So many points of wisdom that you shared. I need to break up some of it and digest it. We have about 10 minutes or so. Do we want to do breakout rooms, or should I open up the floor to see if anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to make?
So I wonder if there's maybe not enough people for great breakout groups, Whitney. Should we just take questions from the floor?
Yeah, why not?
I wonder if anybody here is, let me just show this question here to inspire you if possible. I'm going to go into the screen share and pick, if I can find it, this question here.
I think it's so inspiring, your story, especially for people that have started small schools and they're in the early phases, starting with 7 kids in a storefront 33 years ago to more than 160 students now. And I think, hearing the growth journey and deciding that is also really a core consideration for lots of small school owners as they try and decide, do I want to get bigger? Do I want more? But anyway, I'll hand it back to you.
There's no more important point than that, Whitney. That's not the question I was going to ask, but it's very true that I have learned actually benchmarks that get you through thresholds that before you get past a certain point, whether it's 30 or 70 or 100, or you really want to think twice about what I've learned, the different things that can radically change your mission. So here I've seen create the most audacious, unforgettable founding story you can imagine for your school, one that highlights the challenges and triumphs of your journey. Perhaps use elements of something from your own community. Your story can showcase what you had to or might overcome, achieve, rescue, invent, endure, discover, conquer, defend, sacrifice. I wonder if any of you have a founding story that might, at least the start of one, that might shape into something that needs telling.
Feel free to share your founding story, anyone.
Hi there. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Whitney.
Hello.
Hi, it's Angela. I have two questions that they might link, but I'll tell my founding story. It is actually to do with my son, who learned differently and was extremely intelligent and unrecognized by the current learning system. And we picked him up from school one day, and my husband came to the place where he said, "That's it. You're a teacher. You're going to homeschool him." And I did, and the neighborhood children decided that they wanted to be homeschooled by me. That was not the plan. And it kind of developed from there, where he ended up going off to boarding school, and I was approached by a parent at a school tour. And she said, "I know what you do. I need your help." And that really is what has happened with our school, with Chatmore, since it has been and continues to be. This is its 20th year. It is a small school that is in place to help parents whose children thrive in a small, nurturing environment. We've gone from being, of course, the iterations of being a school for children with behavior difficulties, because that was my background, to now being a school for anyone. And it's mostly has an outdoor learning component to it. It really is just to love kids. We really just love our kids, and we enjoy our families. So that's a nutshell of my story. It started with my son, and it was to discover something for him that turned into something for my community, and it's endured 20 years.
Nice.
I wanted to find out, Stuart, about, I think I put the kind of the thought in the chat. What happens when your baby goes into foster care? So, for example, metaphorically, I've just, as you know, the last 4 years, my school has been. I'm not in leadership in my school anymore. Someone else is. I'm fortunate that it's my daughter, but I still have that tug I still have that drive. I still feel like it's, and I say this sometimes, my school, and I try not to, but how do you overcome that? How do you make that transition? um, I'm struggling with that piece, if I might
Sure.
say.
First off, thanks for sharing that founding story. And I think that what I loved about it is it illustrates that if you don't have that founding story, you're going to get other people are going to make it up for you. And the founding story for your school would have been, had you not been there providing leadership, that it's a school for kids who can't make it. And that's what I loved about Dick Busby's story, is that he defined them as kids who were highly intelligent, looking to be more creative, as well as kids who wouldn't make it. And we put them all together. So if you don't define your founding story, somebody's going to do it for you.
It's a good
With
point.
respect to stepping aside, that might be outside of the parameters of leadership. Succession planning is a massive other seminar. And I think, Angela, as you probably already are discovering for yourself, one of the most beautiful things about getting older and giving way to the next generation is something that's probably in the most central thing to every single spiritual and religious tradition in the history of the world, which is let it go. It's not yours anymore. And you've done what you could. You've given the founding story. You've created the values. But like my lawyer told me one time, you can't rule from the grave, you know. And so that's all I can say. I did do certain things in my school to program it even after I was gone. For instance, when we purchased our land, which a lot of you probably haven't done, but I zoned it so that it could never have more than a certain number of people on it. So things like zoning laws and charters, but even board governance can be changed. But if you decide to go, nonprofit, I mean, your school might have a greater chance of sustaining without you, but it also might have a greater chance of having its mission changed and evolved. So, to a certain extent, you want the new generation to be able to respond to those new things that are coming. So, I don't know whether that's the answer you wanted to have, but let
No,
it go.
it's the answer. Yeah,
It's a
thank
healthy
you.
thing. Neil, what do you got? And I see there's some sidebar questions too that I just opened up. What are you thinking, Neil?
Yeah, well, I'm Neil Short. I'm the chair of the National Association of Small Schools here in England.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been fascinating listening to your story and to listen to all that you have done and set up. We aren't responsible for one school. We're responsible for, certainly among our members, 700-800, part and parcel of around and about 2,000 to 3,000 small schools across the country. And our job really is to make sure that at a time when governments in our country seem to think that big is better, we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to prove that big isn't better. And we're trying to maintain our foothold. And we're doing that in all sorts of ways, by our own examples, by talking to the people, the powers that be, and by trying to work to develop networks to make sure that we can't be ignored. And I was interested to hear one comment. Thank you for that, by the way. I thought that was fascinating to hear a completely different system from ours. We have what we call our Charter for Children, which we can send to you. And the first one is the small school is the heartbeat of its own local community. Again, across the church, shop, and pub, it is the local point of community life and cannot be ignored. And that is something that we do, we believe in. And it was particularly important during the pandemic because we found that the small school became the hub because they were the only face of officialdom in some of our small, rural, isolated communities. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm going to be talking to Whitney next week, and I would certainly like to join you again in the future.
Yes, that would be a great honor. And I did speak to the intentionally small schools of ECIS not too long ago, hosted by Jerry Majeski over in Germany. So I'd love to keep connected with your group, Neil. And I love what you say. This idea of the small school as a heartbeat is a metaphor that keeps coming up. And in fact, in the new book I reference, there's a whole chapter on that. But the large one of the huge strategic advantages you have is that the shopkeepers know you and the grandpas can come in. And the baby at our school, one of the most amazing things I ever did was to create a nursery on campus. It's one of the main things that enables teachers to love our school. And we have teachers who could be getting a lot more money or could be in a bigger environment, but are totally dedicated to the school because of some of these heartbeat moves that we've made. They are strategic. So thanks, Neil. I also see that somebody wanted to know more about Dick Busby. It's
Well,
very
yeah, Emily was wondering the name. She wanted to see if she could search if there was more information about a school or
you won't
anything.
find much. This is a guy before internet uh, who was under the radar, and I had the good fortune to meet him. He inspired me to get on wheels when I started with 7, and then the first year I ended up with 12 students. I had a donor, and he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I'm going to have the largest campus in the county. It's going to be the county. What I need is a van." And that's one of the amazing things I was inspired by working in the international schools in Europe. That the school was small. We could just jump in the van and take our class in where we wanted. We still have, even with 160 students at the Grauer School, we still have a van pool of 7 vans, and I'm still driving kids around. That's one of the things I can do in these head of school emeritus days. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. I mean, Stuart, I'm happy to share his contact details and things with our colleagues. I'll send you guys a thank you note and recording if you want to view it. So thank you all for your time, and thank you, Dr. Grauer. It's a real pleasure. There's so many bites of wisdom that we have to reflect upon. We've got more webinars. We're having webinars each month. We've got, actually, Angela's going to be doing one on staying financially solvent, trying to manage a small school with limited resources, which I think that's going to be really exciting. We've got another one coming up. This is next month. It's Thomas Arnett from the Harvard Christensen Institute, and he's talking about what it will take to reinvent education. So he does a lot of work within the public sector and innovation and also research, and talking about how to disrupt educational models and what it looks like from a community heartbeat sort of standpoint, because that's really what it is. And there's more. But anyway, thank you all. I appreciate you spending the hour with us, and thank you again, Dr. Grauer. Have a nice day, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.